Prologue. In the golden afternoon, we leisurely dip our oars together, though we scarcely grasp the art of rowing. Our tender arms strive with earnestness. Little hands flail in the air, guiding our aimless wanderings. Oh, the trio of mischievous souls. Such splendid moments. Such refreshing weather. How could feeble breaths fail to stir the gentlest feather? Yet, how can one voice quell the clamor of three? The audacious eldest commands, "Let's begin." The second, more softly, opines the tale must be fabricated. The third, scarcely a minute in, casually interrupts. Before long, silence envelopes the air, as they indulge in fantasies, chasing dreamlike children across uncharted wilderness, lands of wonder, conversing amicably with birds and beasts, as if convinced that all is true. Yet, in the end, the narrative concludes. The wellspring of imagination runs dry. The storyteller, weary and longing for closure, proclaims, "The remainder will await our next encounter." Next time, the joyful voices echo in unison. The tale of the enchanted realm gradually unfolds. Yet every story must reach its end. Content, we steer towards home, as the sunset's glow bathes us in warmth. Alice, the tale of this little child, cradled in gentle palms, adorned with the embellishments of childhood dreams, adorned with a mysterious bough reminiscent of memories, much like the wilted garland of a pilgrim, sourced from distant lands and foreign shores. Chapter 1. Into the rabbit hole. Alice began to grow weary of trailing behind her sister, idly seated by the riverbank. On one or two occasions, she glanced at the book her sister was engrossed in, only to discover it contained neither illustrations nor dialogue. Alice simply could not comprehend. What is the merit in a book devoid of pictures and conversations? She made an effort, yet the sweltering heat of summer rendered her drowsy and disinclined to ponder. Thus, Alice mused within herself whether she should fashion a daisy chain. But was it worth the trouble of rising to pick flowers for such a trivial amusement? As she contemplated, out of the blue, a large white rabbit with pink eyes scurried past her. This was no cause for alarm. Alice felt no sense of wonder, despite the rabbit muttering to itself, oh dear, I shall be late." Everything seemed so ordinary that it failed to elicit the astonishment it ought to have in Alice. To her astonishment, the rabbit produced a pocket watch from its waistcoat, glanced at the time, and hurried on its way. Startled, Alice sprang to her feet, suddenly realizing she had never seen a rabbit in a waistcoat, much less one that carried a pocket watch. An insatiable curiosity propelled her to dash across the meadow in pursuit, just in time to witness the rabbit leap into a large rabbit hole beneath the hedge. Without a moment's hesitation, Alice followed suit and leapt down, giving no thought to how she might extricate herself thereafter. The rabbit hole resembled a tunnel, straight and unwavering as it extended forward, only to suddenly bend downward. Alice had no time to contemplate how to halt her descent, and found herself plunging into a deep well. Very well, Alice mused. Having fallen like this, I shall never again fear tumbling down the stairs. They at home will surely deem me exceptionally brave, for even if I were to plummet from the rooftop, I would do so in silence. She continued to fall and fall. How long would this go on? Alice exclaimed. How many miles have I already descended? I must be nearing the Earth's core, which is approximately 4,000 miles deep, I believe. Look, Alice had indeed acquired a wealth of knowledge at school, yet regrettably, this was not an opportune moment to showcase it, as no one was present to hear her words. Nonetheless, revisiting old knowledge is always beneficial. Indeed, that is roughly the distance, but what are my current coordinates in terms of longitude and latitude? In truth, Alice was entirely ignorant of longitude and latitude. She merely felt that these terms were fitting in the moment. She began to speak with fervor. I am about to tumble from the other side of the earth. How amusing it would be if I were to suddenly appear among those who are upside down, head down, and feet up. What do they call them again? Nuisances. In truth, Alice felt relieved that no one had heard her this time, for she seemed to have mispronounced that term. Nonetheless, I shall still inquire as to which country this is. Ahem. Pardon me, dear lady, is this New Zealand or Australia? She even attempted to curtsy in mid-fall, performing a curtsy in the air. Can you imagine? She would certainly think, what a silly girl has sprung forth from nowhere. Best not to ask, perhaps there are signs or something of the sort. As she continued to fall, with nothing else to occupy her thoughts, Alice chattered on. I'm certain that Dinah will miss me tonight. Dinah was Alice's beloved pet cat. I hope they remember to set out a small dish of milk for Dinah during afternoon tea. Why, dear Dinah, how I wish you could fall down with me. Of course, there won't be any mice appearing out of thin air, but perhaps you might catch a bat, bats are rather similar to mice. But do cats eat bats? Suddenly, with a thud, she landed upon a pile of firewood and dry leaves at last. Her descent had concluded. Alice emerged unscathed, springing to her feet and gazing upwards, only to be met by an expanse of darkness. Before her lay a lengthy corridor, where she could still discern the hurried figure of the white rabbit dashing away. Without a moment's hesitation, Alice pursued him with the swiftness of the wind, just in time to overhear the rabbit exclaim as he turned a corner, "Oh, my ears and whiskers, how late it's getting!" Although Alice was quite near when she rounded the corner, the white rabbit had vanished from sight. She soon realized she was in a narrow, low-ceilinged hall illuminated by a row of lights descending from the ceiling. There, she discovered a small triangular table, entirely composed of glass, upon which rested a diminutive golden key. Instantly, Alice perceived that this key might be the means to unlock one of the doors, yet, to her dismay, it was not. The locks on those doors were far too large, and the key was far too small. Undeterred, she made a second attempt and noticed a low curtain she had previously overlooked. Behind the curtain, she found a small door, scarcely 15 inches high. With anticipation, Alice inserted the tiny golden key, and to her delight, it fit perfectly. Alice opened the door, revealing a diminutive corridor scarcely larger than a mouse hole. She could only kneel down and peer inside, where an unparalleled garden awaited her. At that moment, she yearned to escape the dim hall and wander through the blooming paradise adorned with refreshing waterfalls. However, her head could not even fit through the entrance. Poor Alice mused, "Even if my head could pass through, what good would it do if my shoulders couldn't follow? Oh, how I wish I could stretch and shrink like a telescope. I believe it is within my capability, but first, I must ascertain how to proceed." You see, the bizarre occurrences had led Alice to believe that nothing was truly impossible. The bottle bore the words "drink me," and she thought it should pose no issue. Nonetheless, Alice refrained from hasty actions, murmuring to herself, "Let me first ensure there is null," able declaring poisonous. She recalled stories of children who, due to neglecting the sage advice of friends, had met dire fates burned by hot fire pokers or devoured by beasts. They had failed to heed simple life lessons, such as the danger of holding a red-hot poker too long or the perils of cutting one's finger with a small knife. One particular warning remained etched in her memory. If a bottle bore the label poison, one must never consume its contents, just wait and see. However, this bottle bore no such warning, and so Alice took a tentative sip, discovering it to be quite delightful. In truth, the liquid was a harmonious blend of flavors reminiscent of cherry pie, egg custard, pineapple, roast chicken, toffee, and cream toast, which she soon consumed entirely. "This feels extraordinarily peculiar," exclaimed Alice. "I must be shrinking like a telescope." Indeed, she was now approximately 10 inches tall, and the thought of her diminutive stature allowing her to effortlessly pass through the small door into the garden filled her with delight. However, she patiently waited a few moments to see if she would continue to diminish, that a sense of anxiety crept in as she pondered, "What if I shrink to the size of a candle flame and gradually extinguish, disappearing altogether? I am genuinely curious about what I look like now." She envisioned the candle slowly burning down and the light flickering out, although she could hardly recall having witnessed such a phenomenon. "Stop crying, this is of no avail," Alice encouraged herself, commanding her tears to cease. "I suggest you remain still for a moment." She often provided herself with sound advice, albeit rarely heeded, and sometimes chastised herself to the point of tears. There was an instance when she slapped herself for cheating during a game of croquet, a consequence of her insatiable curiosity in playing dual roles. Before long, her gaze fell upon a small glass box beneath the table. Upon opening it, she discovered a small cake adorned with raisins arranged to spell "Eat me." Resolutely, Alice declared, "Very well, I shall consume it. If I grow larger, I can retrieve the key. If I shrink further, I will simply crawl through the door's crack. Thus, regardless of the outcome, I shall gain entry to the garden. What is there to be concerned about?" Alice took a small bite of the cake, filled with anticipation. "What will happen? Will I grow larger or smaller?" She placed her hand atop her head, attempting to perceive whether she was growing taller, yet to her astonishment, nothing changed. However, who truly undergoes a transformation after indulging in the cake? Her peculiar experiences throughout the day had instilled in her a yearning for the extraordinary, rendery. In the mundane aspects of life, rather tedious. Thus, she resolved to consume the remainder of the cake entirely. Chapter 2. The Pool of Tears. She was still contemplating how to deliver the new boots to her feet. Surely, they must be sent, Alice mused. Gifting my own feet is quite an amusing thought. The postal address is rather peculiar. Situated next to the fireplace, the hearth rug, Mr. Right Foot, recipient, Alice. Oh dear, what nonsense am I spouting? Just then, her head struck the ceiling of the hall, and she was now nearly 9 feet tall. She promptly seized the small golden key and hurried towards the garden door. Poor Alice. She endeavored to curl her body and crawl upon the ground, managing only to glimpse the garden with one eye, yet to enter was utterly fantastical. Alice sat up and wept once more. You ought to be ashamed of yourself, Alice said, for a girl of your stature. What purpose does this incessant crying serve? Do stop, I implore you. Yet she could not contain herself, and continued to shed bucketfuls of tears, forming a vast pool around her, approximately 4 feet deep, extending into the center of the hall. Alice picked up her fan and gloves, for the hall was quite warm, and as she fanned herself, she remarked, Goodness, so many strange occurrences today. Everything was perfectly ordinary yesterday. I wonder if I have been bewitched during the night. Let me ponder, was there something different when I awoke this morning? I vaguely recall a subtle sensation of change. But if I am not myself, then who am I? Ah, what an enigma. She began to recall all her contemporaries, attempting to discern her own identity amidst the familiar faces. I am certain I am not Ada, Alice declared, for her hair is wavy, while mine remains utterly straight. Neither am I Mabel, for I possess a wealth of knowledge, whereas she seems oblivious to everything. Moreover, she is she, and I am I, and how utterly perplexing this all is. If only I could reclaim everything I once knew, I would strive to do so. Let me ponder. 4 times 5 equals 12. 4 times 6 equals 13. 4 times 7. Such calculations will never yield 20. Yet, multiplication tables do not suffice to elucidate matters. Let me consider geography. London is the capital of Paris. Paris is the capital of Rome. Rome. No, that is incorrect. It must be a mistake. Surely, I must have exchanged places with Mabel. Allow me to attempt reciting How Does the Little Crocodile. She crossed her hands upon her knees, as if imparting wisdom, and began to repeat. Though her voice sounded hoarse and peculiar, differing each time from the previous rendition. How doth the little crocodile improve his shining tail, and pour the waters of the Nile on every golden scale? How cheerfully he seems to grin, how neatly spread his claws, and welcomes little fishes in with gently smiling jaws. In the midst of this, she glanced down at her hands, astonished to discover that she had donned a white glove of a rabbit while speaking. Am I truly able to wear this glove? She pondered. I must have shrunk once more. Alice rose to her feet and approached the table, measuring her height with a nod, just as she had anticipated. She was now approximately 2 feet tall and continuing to diminish rapidly. She quickly discovered that the culprit was the fan in her hand, which she hastily discarded, narrowly averting the fate of shrinking into a mere speck. Alice had visited the seaside only once and concluded that no matter where one ventured along the British coast, one would encounter numerous bathing tubs in the sea, children digging in the sand with wooden spades, and rows of wooden cabins, behind which lay the train station. However, she soon realized she had fallen into a pool of tears, the very tears shed when she had stood 9 feet tall. I truly wish I hadn't cried so intensely, Alice lamented, swimming about in search of an exit. I suppose I ought to be punished by drowning in my own tears, but how peculiar that would be. Yet, everything today felt exceedingly strange. At that moment, she heard something thrashing in the pool not far from her, and she swam a little closer to discern what it was. At first, she imagined it must be a walrus or a hippopotamus. But then she recalled her current diminutive stature and realized it was merely a mouse that had slid into the pool of tears, much like herself. What purpose would it serve to converse with this mouse? Alice mused. Everything here is so bizarre, it is likely that it could speak. Nevertheless, there is no harm in trying. She called out, "Oh, mouse, do you know the way out of this pool? I am utterly exhausted from swimming here, Mr. Mouse." Alice believed this was the manner in which one conversed with a mouse. She had never engaged in such an endeavor before. Yet she recalled having seen in her brother's Latin grammar book, "Mouse, mouse, give the mouse a mouse." "Oh, mouse." The mouse gazed at her curiously, seemingly blinking its small eye a few times, but uttered not a word. Perhaps it did not comprehend English, Alice pondered. I dare say it must be a French mouse. Having arrived with William the Conqueror, despite Alice's grasp of history, she could not quite ascertain the timeline of events. She then inquired, "Do you like cats?" This was the first sentence from her French textbook. The mouse, startled, leaped out of the water, trembling. "Oh, I am so sorry," Alice exclaimed hastily, fearful of offending the poor creature. "I completely forgot that you do not like cats." "I detest cats," the mouse retorted in a sharp and resolute tone. "If you were in my position, would you like cats?" "Well, perhaps not," Alice replied in a soothing manner. "Please do not take offense. But I do hope you might consider meeting my cat, Dinah. I believe if you were to see her, you would come to appreciate cats. She truly is a quiet and delightful companion." Alice, half submerged in the pool, lazily continued. "She sits by the hearth, mewing softly, licking her paws, grooming her face. She is an exceptional home companion and quite adept at catching mice." "Oh, I beg your pardon," Alice called out again, and this time the mouse's fur bristled with agitation. She sensed that the mouse was genuinely upset. "If you prefer not to discuss it, we shall refrain," she offered. "Indeed," exclaimed the mouse, trembling so violently that even the tip of its tail quivered as if it were I who had initiated this topic. "We all detest cats. They are filthy, vulgar, and coarse. Do not let me hear that word again." "I shall not," Alice replied, eager to shift the conversation. "What of dogs, then?" It was time to depart, for the pool had become overcrowded with birds tumbling into the water. There was a duck, a dodo, a tiny bird, an eagle, and other peculiar creatures. Alice took the lead, and all the birds and beasts swam towards the shore. Chapter 3. The caucus race and a long tail. What had indeed transformed into a most bizarre gathering now found the shore populated by birds dragging their feathers along the ground and animals with fur clinging to their skin, all soaked and huddled together. The initial dilemma facing these creatures was how to dry themselves swiftly. A cacophony of voices arose in discussion, and after a few minutes, Alice realized she had melded seamlessly with these animals, as if they were long acquainted. In fact, she had just engaged in a lengthy debate with the parrot, Lori, whose expression had shifted from sunny to sullen. Aside from the declaration, "I am older than you, and thus no more," it had fallen silent. However, Alice was unaware of Lori's actual age and, feeling indignant, noted that the parrot had explicitly refused to disclose it, leaving both parties at an impasse. At last, the mouse spoke, seemingly the authority among them, proclaiming loudly, "Sit down, everyone, take your seats, and listen to me. I shall soon assist you in drying off." They all gathered in a large circle, allowing the mouse to stand in the center. Alice gazed at it anxiously, for she feared that if she did not dry off quickly, she would catch a severe cold. "Uh-huh," the mouse declared with great bravado. "Are you all prepared? I know the swiftest method to dry you. Please, maintain silence." The endeavors of Conqueror William received the support of the Pope, and thus England swiftly succumbed to him, for they were in dire need of a leader. Plunder had long since permeated their very essence. For instance, Edwin and Morcar, the Earls of Mercia and Northumbria, achoo! Squawked the parrot, Raleigh, shivering from the chill. "Pardon me." The mouse frowned but remained courteous, inquiring, "Do you have something to say?" "No." Raleigh hastily waved his wing. "I assumed you had a remark to make." The mouse continued, "Then I shall proceed. The Earls of Mercia and Northumbria, Edwin and Morcar, pledged their allegiance. And even the patriotic Archbishop of Canterbury, Stigand, found it wise to. Wise to discover what? The duck interjected. "When I seek something, I certainly know." The duck asserted, "It is generally a frog or a worm. The question is, what did the Archbishop discover?" The mouse, undeterred by this inquiry, hurriedly continued, "It was wise to accompany Edgar Atheling to meet William and present him with the crown." William's initial reaction was rather temperate. However, deep within him lay the inherent arrogance of a Norman. "My dear, how are you now?" the mouse inquired, turning towards Alice. "I am still as damp as ever." Alice replied melancholically, "It seems this tale has done little to dry me." "In that case," the dodo rose solemnly, "I propose we adjourn and immediately implement more effective remedies." "Speak in English," the little eaglet exclaimed. "I scarcely comprehend half of your obscure vocabulary, and more importantly, I harbor no belief in your words." Some other birds erupted in laughter. "What I mean to convey," the dodo retorted angrily, "is that the most effective method for drying us off is to engage in a race around in circles." "What is a race around in circles?" Alice inquired. though she was not genuinely eager for an answer. The dodo paused, seemingly expecting someone to respond, while the others appeared disinclined to speak. "Oh," the dodo said, "then it would be best to try it at least once to learn how it is done. Perhaps on a winter's day, you might wish to partake in it yourself." Allow me to explain how the dodo accomplishes this. First, draw a circular track. It matters not whether it is truly circular, the dodo remarked. Then everyone is arranged upon the track, scattered about. There are no starting positions or ready sets. One may commence running whenever one wishes and halt at one's discretion, thus making it quite ambiguous as to when the race truly concludes. However, after a half-hour of running, everyone had long ceased to be damp. Suddenly, the dodo exclaimed, "The race is over." They all gathered together, panting, and inquired, "Who won?" The dodo needed a moment to ponder, sitting on the ground for quite a while, one finger pressed against its forehead. Resembling the iconic pose often depicted in portraits of Shakespeare, the others waited in silence. Finally, the dodo declared, "The victors are all of you. Each person deserves a prize." But who would present the awards? Many asked in unison. "Oh, of course, it will be her," said the dodo, pointing a finger at Alice. The entire group immediately encircled her, chanting, "Prizes! Prizes!" Alice, taken aback and in despair, reached into her pocket and retrieved a box of chocolate liqueurs, fortunately untouched by her tears, to distribute as prizes, ensuring each animal surrounding her received one. "She should have a prize too," said the mouse. "Only the brooch remains." Alice replied sadly. "Give it to me," insisted the dodo. Alice found the whole affair utterly absurd. Yet the animals appeared so earnest that she could only bow and accept the brooch, striving to appear as dignified and solemn as possible. With the prizes distributed, the next step was to indulge in the chocolate liqueurs, which incited a flurry of noise and confusion. The large birds complained the chocolates were too small to savor, while the small birds choked and required others to pat their backs. Nevertheless, all things must come to an end, and they settled once more in a circle, pleading with the mouse to tell them more stories. "You promised to share your tales with me, did you not?" Alice spoke of her disdain for candy. She whispered, only uttering the initials of cats and dogs, fearful of frightening them away again. "My tale is lengthy and sorrowful. I must recount it with care," the mouse declared, turning to Alice with a sigh. "Indeed, you possess a long tale," Alice remarked, yet she struggled to comprehend why he deemed it sorrowful. As the mouse narrated his story, this query lingered in her mind, leading Alice to interpret the tale thus. An irate dog confronted a mouse in a room, proclaiming, "Let us go to court. I shall sue you. Come now, you cannot refuse. A resolution between us is inevitable, for I am dreadfully bored this morning." The mouse retorted, "Dear Mr. Dog, without a jury and a judge, such a trial is invalid and merely a waste of time." The dog snarled menacingly, "I am both judge and jury. I can execute the entire legal process and condemn you to death." "You are not even listening." The mouse chastised Alice sternly. "What are you pondering?" "I beg your pardon," Alice replied with humility. "I suppose you have reached the 5th turn, have you not?" "No." The mouse shrieked, exceedingly vexed. "It is a knot." With her helpful and eager spirit, Alice anxiously looked around and exclaimed, "Oh, let me assist you in untangling it." "I shall no longer endure this," declared the mouse, rising and departing, completely missing the point, an affront to my dignity. "It was not my intention," the unfortunate Alice pleaded. Yet the mouse retorted with indignation, "You are far too emotional, you know," and dismissed her entirely. How regrettable that it did not linger. The mouse had vanished, leaving the parrot, Lori, to sigh. Seizing the opportunity, a crab addressed its daughter. "Ah, my dear, this is indeed a vivid lesson. One must never lose their temper frivolously." "Do not speak, mother," replied the young crab, slightly irritable. "Even the good-natured oyster cannot tolerate your outbursts. Forgive my impertinence, but may I inquire, who is Diana?" asked the parrot, Lori. "I truly should not have mentioned Diana. She is rather melancholic, as it seems no one here holds her in esteem. Yet I believe she is the finest feline in existence. Oh, my beloved little Diana. I wonder if I shall ever see you again." Chapter 4. Little Bill sent by the rabbit. It was none other than the white rabbit, who ambled in a flustered manner, anxiously scanning his surroundings as though he had misplaced something of great importance. Alice overheard him muttering, "Duchess, Duchess. Oh, my dear paws. Oh, my fur and whiskers. She will execute me, just as one would hunt a stoat. Where on earth have I lost them?" Alice immediately surmised he was in search of his fan and that pair of white gloves. Eager to assist, she endeavored to help him locate them, yet to no avail. Ever since her swim in the pool, everything seemed to have changed. The glass table in the hall and that little door had entirely disappeared. It regarded me as its maid. She mused while running. How astonished it would be upon discovering my true identity. However, I should bestow upon it the fan and gloves, if I can find them. As she uttered these words, she stumbled upon a quaint little house, adorned with a bright brass plaque inscribed with the name W. Rabbit. Without knocking, she entered and hurried upstairs, fearful of encountering the real Mary, and who would surely expel her before she could procure the fan and gloves. Alice began to ponder aloud. How peculiar it is to run errands for the rabbit. I imagine Diana will soon be able to communicate with me. She envisioned the unfolding scenario. Miss Alice, come here. Ready for a stroll? I shall be there momentarily, nurse. But I must check if the mouse has emerged. If Diana were to issue such commands, they would undoubtedly eject her from the house. At that moment, she entered a tidy little room, where a table by the window held, as she had hoped, a fan and 2 or 3 pairs of small white gloves. Alice seized the fan and a pair of gloves, poised to depart the room when her gaze fell upon a small bottle beside the mirror. This time, she did not drink from the labeled bottle, yet she uncorked it and brought it to her lips. She mused, I know that whatever I consume or imbibe will surely lead to something intriguing, so let me discover what this bottle may do to me. I truly wish it could enable me to grow once more, for I detest being such a diminutive creature. Indeed, her wishes had been fulfilled, and unexpectedly. Before she had consumed even half the bottle, she found her head pressed against the ceiling. Consequently, she had no choice but to bend down to prevent a neck injury. Hastily, she set the bottle aside, admonishing herself, enough. I fervently hope I shall cease to grow. I can no longer exit through the door. Had I known, I would not have indulged so excessively. Alas, it was all too late. She continued to ascend in height, soon compelled to kneel upon the ground, and after another minute, even that modest space vanished. In a desperate attempt, she propped one elbow against the door as she lay down, curling the other arm around her head. Yet, she persisted in growing, ultimately extending one arm out the window and one foot onto the chimney, muttering to herself, Now, regardless of what transpires, there is nothing I can do. What will I ultimately become? Fortunately for Alice, that diminutive enchanted bottle had exhausted its magic, and she ceased to enlarge. However, her current state remained quite uncomfortable. Moreover, it appeared she would never have the opportunity to exit this room, which was hardly a cause for joy. When one is either transformed into a giant or reduced to a diminutive size, being commanded by mice and rabbits is far less appealing than remaining at home. Poor Alice lamented to herself, I truly wish I had not fallen into that rabbit hole. Yet, this experience is undeniably extraordinary. I cannot fathom what might happen next. In the past, while reading fairy tales, I believed such occurrences were mere fiction, and now I find myself ensnared within one. There ought to be a book written about me. There truly should. When I grow up, I shall pen a book, but I have already matured sufficiently, Alice added sorrowfully, lamenting that there is scarcely enough room for me to grow here. Yet, upon a sudden reflection, she pondered whether she might never age beyond her current state. This thought offered a peculiar comfort, a means to evade the inevitability of becoming an old woman, albeit at the cost of perpetual schooling. Oh, how I detest this notion. Truly, you foolish Alice. She chided herself. How can you attend lessons here? How can you, when there is hardly any space for you, let alone for textbooks? Thus, she continued her playful banter, engaging in a dialogue between two personas, first as one, then the other, carrying on with great seriousness. After a few moments, she heard a voice from outside and paused to listen. Marianne, bring me my gloves at once. A voice called out, followed by the sound of footsteps on the stairs. Alice recognized it was the rabbit seeking her, and she trembled, shaking the house. Entirely oblivious to the fact that she was likely 1,000 times larger than the rabbit and had no reason to fear. Before long, the rabbit arrived at the door, attempting to push it open. However, as the door swung inward, Alice's elbow was firmly wedged against it, rendering it immovable. She overheard the rabbit muttering to itself, Then I shall go around and enter through the window. Futile, Alice thought. As she felt the rabbit just beneath the window, she suddenly reached out her hand, grasping at the air. She grasped nothing, yet the echoes of a piercing scream, a thud, and the shattering of glass reached her ears. She deduced that it might have plummeted into a glass greenhouse filled with cucumbers or something akin to that. Then, an irate voice of a rabbit rang out. Pat, where are you? Following this was a voice she had never encountered before, proclaiming, I am indeed here, digging for apples, master. You are indeed digging for apples. The rabbit retorted angrily. Hurry over. Come assist me in extricating myself from this predicament. Soon, the sound of more glass shattering ensued. Now tell me, Pat, what is within the window? Why, it is an arm, master. He clearly stated it was an arm. An arm, you fool. Who has ever seen one so large? How can it occupy the entire window? It certainly can, master, yet it is indeed an arm. Well, regardless, it ought not to be there. Go and remove it at once. Oh, so Bill must have climbed in through the chimney, correct? Alice mused, feeling a twinge of sympathy for them. As it appeared they had shifted all the blame onto Bill. I would never wish to be in Bill's position. That chimney must be exceedingly narrow, but I believe I could give it a kick. She endeavored to stretch her foot beneath the chimney. Awaiting the sound of a small creature, the identity of which eluded her, scrambling above her head in the flue, then murmured to herself, "That must be Bill." With a determined kick, she awaited the ensuing events. The first thing she heard was, "Bill has flown out." Then came the voice of the rabbit. "Quick, catch it, you, over by the hedge." A moment of silence ensued, followed by a cacophony of sounds. "Lift your head, quickly fetch the brandy, don't choke it. How are you feeling? Old chap, what's wrong? Tell us everything." Finally, a somewhat feeble and breathless voice responded, "Well, it seems I know nothing at all, thank you. I feel much better now, but I am too flustered to convey what I know. Something nudged me like a toy in a spring box, and I shot up like a rocket." "That must be Bill," thought Alice. "You truly soared like a rocket, old fellow," came the voices of others. "We must set the house ablaze," echoed the rabbit. Alice shouted as loudly as she could, "If you do that, I will summon Dinah to give you a sound thrashing." Instantly, silence fell. Alice mused to herself, "I have no idea what they will do next. If they are clever, they will rip off the roof." After a minute or two, they began to scurry about again. Alice heard the rabbit say, "Just one cart will do." One cart of what? Alice pondered. But before she could think long, a cascade of small pebbles tumbled through the window, some striking her face. "I must put an end to this," Alice declared, and shouted, "You had better not do that again." Another silence followed. Alice was astonished to notice that the pebbles on the ground had transformed into tiny cakes, which inspired a brilliant idea in her mind. "If I consume a piece of cake," she pondered, "it will surely alter my dimensions. I cannot possibly grow larger. I believe it will instead make me smaller." Thus, she devoured a slice of cake and joyously discovered herself beginning to shrink. Once she became small enough to exit through the door, Alice dashed out of the house and encountered a gathering of small creatures and birds awaiting her. The poor little lizard, Bill, was among them, being cradled by 2 guinea pigs who were feeding him from a bottle. As soon as Alice appeared, they rushed towards her. But she fled desperately, swiftly finding refuge in a dense woodland. "The first thing I must do," Alice muttered to herself as she strolled through the forest, "is to grow to a size that suits me, and the second task is to locate the path into that delightful garden." I deemed this to be the most prudent course of action. Undoubtedly, this seemed a splendid plan, neatly arranged. The only challenge was that Alice had no idea where to begin. She anxiously scanned the woods when a bark overhead caused her to look up. A gigantic puppy gazed down at her with round, bulging eyes, feebly extending a paw in an attempt to stroke her. "Poor little creature," Alice exclaimed in a tone of endearment, whistling sharply. However, the thought that the puppy might be hungry filled her with trepidation, for even if she coaxed the puppy, she might still risk being devoured by the dog. Alice found herself at a loss, so she picked up a small stick and extended it before the little dog. The dog yipped with joy, immediately leaping into action, racing towards the stick as if to engage in a fierce battle. Alice took refuge behind a large thistle to avoid being trampled. She then appeared on the opposite side of the trunk, and once more, the dog charged at the stick. But in its haste, it tumbled head over heels, revealing its eagerness to seize the object. Alice felt as though she were playing a game with a powerful draft horse, perpetually at risk of being crushed beneath its hooves, prompting her to circle the thistle. The little dog continued its relentless assaults on the stick, running and jumping, its throat emitting hoarse barks, until at last, it settled at a distance, panting with its tongue out and big eyes half closed. To Alice, this seemed an opportune moment to escape. She took off running until breathless, the distant barks of the little dog fading into mere whispers. In truth, it was an utterly charming puppy. As Alice leaned against a buttercup to rest, she plucked a leaf to use as a fan, mused, "If only I were of the right stature, I would delight in teaching it tricks. Oh dear, I almost forgot that I must grow taller quickly. Let me ponder how to achieve that. Perhaps I ought to consume something or drink something. But the most pressing question remains, what precisely should it be?" The most pressing question, of course, was this. Alice glanced around at the flowers and plants. Yet in this peculiar situation, she could discern nothing that resembled an antidote. Beside her stood a large mushroom, nearly her height. After surveying her surroundings, Alice pondered the possibility of examining what lay atop it. She tiptoed and peered over the edge of the mushroom, her gaze meeting that of a large caterpillar. The caterpillar, with its arms crossed, sat languidly atop the mushroom, quietly smoking a long hookah, seemingly indifferent to Alice or to anything at all. Chapter 5. The caterpillar's advice. Neither the caterpillar nor Alice uttered a word, each gazing at the other until, at last, the caterpillar withdrew the hookah from its mouth and, in a languid and drowsy tone, inquired, "Who are you?" "What do you mean?" Alice replied. The caterpillar's tone grew stern. "You ought to clarify." "I fear I cannot articulate it clearly, sir," Alice responded. "You see, I am not quite myself. I do not comprehend," the caterpillar stated. "Surely you jest?" the caterpillar remarked. "Very well, perhaps you have yet to realize," Alice continued. "But when you transform into a chrysalis, you are aware that one day you will metamorphose into a butterfly. I imagine that might feel rather peculiar, would it not?" "Not in the slightest," the caterpillar retorted. "Well, perhaps your sentiments differ," Alice suggested. "I can only surmise that it would feel quite strange to me." "You," the caterpillar said disdainfully. "Who exactly are you?" "Why?" the caterpillar questioned, perplexed. Yet another perplexing inquiry. Alice, unable to conjure a satisfactory explanation, turned away, observing that the caterpillar appeared rather discontented. "Do not lose your temper," the caterpillar remarked. "Is that all?" Alice responded, striving to suppress her irritation. "No," the caterpillar replied. Alice contemplated waiting a while longer, as she had nothing else to occupy her thoughts. Perhaps the caterpillar would impart some noteworthy information. Minutes passed in silence. The caterpillar engrossed in smoking its hookah until it finally unfolded its arms, removed the pipe from its lips, and inquired, "So, do you believe your identity has shifted?" "Alas, it seems so, sir," Alice replied, "for I cannot recall the things I once knew, and I have already changed in size multiple times within the span of 10 minutes. "Cannot recall what?" the caterpillar pressed. "Well, I attempted to recite 'How does the little busy bee,' but the words came out entirely different." Alice's tone was tinged with melancholy. "Then recite again 'You are old, Father William,'" the caterpillar urged. Thus, Alice clasped her hands together and began to recite. The young man said, "You are old, Father William. Your hair has grown white. You still tumble about. Do you not think, at your age, this is right?" Father William replied to his son, "When I was young, I feared it would harm my brain, but now I am quite certain it does not. Why, I do it again and again." The young man remarked, "You have aged. Just as I previously mentioned, you have become quite portly, yet you performed a somersault at the door and prayed. What is the reason behind this?" The priest, shaking his gray locks, replied, "In my youth, my limbs were supple. I used this ointment, which costs merely a shilling per box. Would you care for 2 boxes? The young man continued, "You have aged, your speech is slurred. You can hardly consume anything tough, yet you devoured a goose down to the bones. How did you manage that?" His father responded, "In my youth, I adhered to the law and debated every case with my wife. This fortified my jaw muscles, benefiting me throughout my life." The young man asserted, "You have aged. It is hard to imagine your gaze once held the same resolute spark. Yet you balance an eel on the tip of your nose. What makes you so astute? Do cease your pretensions. Do you think I can endure such nonsense all day? Depart, or I shall cast you down the stairs." "Your recitation is somewhat amiss," remarked the caterpillar. "Perhaps not merely amiss," Alice timidly replied. "Some words have changed." "It is entirely incorrect," the caterpillar decisively stated, then fell silent for a few moments. It was the caterpillar who broke the silence, asking, "To what size do you wish to grow?" "I do not know," Alice replied. The caterpillar continued, "Have you ever been spoken to in such a manner?" Alice had never encountered such treatment before, and thus felt a surge of anger. "Are you satisfied now?" inquired the caterpillar. "Very well, sir," Alice said. "If you do not mind, I would like to grow a bit larger." 3 inches in height is truly pitiful," the caterpillar retorted, raising its body to display its exact stature. "But I am not accustomed to it." Alice lamented, her eyes filled with a pleading gaze. She thought to herself, "I truly wish these creatures were not so easily offended." "You shall soon grow accustomed to it," the caterpillar replied, placing a hookah to its lips and resuming its smoking. This time, Alice patiently awaited its next utterance. In less than a minute, the caterpillar removed the hookah from its mouth, yawned, and shook its body. It then descended from the mushroom and crawled onto the grass, remarking, "One side will make you taller, and the other will render you shorter." "Which side?" Alice pondered. "The mushroom," the caterpillar stated, as though Alice had audibly inquired. Moments later, it vanished. "Which side is which?" Alice mused, biting a small piece from the mushroom in her right hand, eager to test the effect. The next moment, she felt a jolt at her chin, and to her astonishment, it struck her foot. Alice was filled with trepidation, but there was no time to spare, for she was rapidly diminishing. She promptly began to consume another piece of mushroom. Her chin was firmly pressed against her foot, leaving little room to open her mouth, yet she managed to take a bite from the mushroom in her left hand. "At last, my head is free," Alice exclaimed with delight, but her tone swiftly shifted to one of panic when she discovered her shoulders had vanished. Glancing down, all she could see was an elongated neck, protruding like a stem from the verdant foliage below. What could those green things be? Alice pondered. Where have my shoulders gone? Oh, my poor hands, why can't I see you? As she spoke, she flailed her arms about, yet to no avail, only stirring the distant leaves slightly. With seemingly no opportunity to raise her hands to her head, she attempted to lower her head instead, only to find her neck could bend in any direction, akin to that of a serpent, just as she shaped it into an elegant curve, ready to weave through the leaves. She realized they were merely the tops of the towering trees amidst which she wandered. At that moment, a jarring hiss startled her, prompting her to recoil. A large pigeon swooped towards her face, flapping its wings fiercely. "A serpent!" the pigeon screeched. "I am not a serpent," Alice retorted angrily. "Leave me be." "A serpent, I say again," the pigeon repeated, its tone more somber, followed by a whimper. "I have tried every method, yet I cannot deal with serpents." "I have no idea what you are talking about," Alice replied. "I have tried tree roots, riverbanks, and hedges," the pigeon continued, entirely disregarding Alice. "But those serpents are simply too greedy." Increasingly bewildered, Alice concluded that uttering another word before the pigeon finished would be futile. "The act of hatching eggs is already quite troublesome," the pigeon lamented, "and I must remain vigilant against poisonous snakes day and night. Alas, I have not closed my eyes for 3 weeks." "I apologize for causing you distress," Alice replied, gradually grasping its meaning. "Just as I thought I could finally rid myself of them by moving to the tallest tree in the forest," the pigeon continued, raising its voice in a shriek. "They descended upon me once more from the heavens. Ah, poisonous snakes! But I am not a snake, I assure you," Alice declared. "I am well. What are you?" the pigeon retorted, eager to hear what new nonsense you might utter. "What a delightful tale!" the pigeon sneered in a tone dripping with contempt. "In my lifetime, I have encountered countless little girls, yet never one with such a neck. No, you are indeed a snake. Denial is futile. I suppose you will next claim that you have never partaken of an egg." "Of course I have," Alice insisted, for she was a remarkably honest child. "Little girls can consume eggs just as snakes do, you know." "I do not believe it," the pigeon scoffed. "However, if they do, then they are merely a kind of snake. That is all I can say." This notion was novel to Alice, and she fell silent for a moment or two, allowing the pigeon to seize the opportunity to add, "I know you are searching for eggs. Whether you are a little girl or a snake is of no consequence to me." "This matters greatly to me," Alice hastily replied. "Yet I am not in search of eggs. If I were, I would not desire yours, for I do not fancy them raw." "Very well, then be on your way," exclaimed the pigeon, quite indignant, as she settled back into her nest. Alice did her best to shrink down amongst the trees, as her neck was incessantly becoming entangled among the branches. Every now and then, she was obliged to halt and disentangle herself. After a time, she recollected that she still held the pieces of mushroom in her hands, and applied herself very cautiously to the task, nibbling first at one and then at the other. She grew taller, and then shorter, until she had succeeded in reducing herself to her usual height. As she spoke, she emerged rather suddenly upon an open space, with a little house in it about 4 feet high. "Whoever lives there," thought Alice, "it'll never do to come upon them this size. Why, I should frighten them out of their wits." So she began nibbling at the right-hand bit again, and did not venture to go near the house till she had brought herself down to 9 inches high. Chapter 6. Pig and Pepper. The fish footman began by producing from under his arm a great letter, nearly as large as himself, and this he handed over to the other, saying in a solemn tone, "For the Duchess." "An invitation from the Queen to play croquet," the frog footman repeated in the same solemn tone, only changing the order of the words a little. "From the Queen. An invitation for the Duchess to play croquet." Then they both bowed low, and their curls got entangled together. Alice walked timidly up to the door and knocked. "There's no sort of use in knocking," said the footman, "for two reasons. First, because I'm on the same side of the door as you are. Secondly, because they're making such a noise inside, no one could possibly hear you." At that moment, an extraordinarily peculiar sound echoed, incessantly mingled with the noise of sneezing, occasionally followed by a resounding crash, as if a plate or kettle had shattered. "So, I implore you," Alice inquired, "how might I gain entry? If there were a door between us, your knocking would indeed seem justified." The frog's servant disregarded her words, stating, for instance, "If you were inside while I remained outside, you could knock, and I could permit your exit, you see." He gazed upward as he spoke, a behavior Alice deemed rather uncivilized. "I shall remain seated here," the frog's servant declared, "and we shall discuss it tomorrow." Just then, the door swung open, and a large plate soared over the frog's servant's head, narrowly grazing his nose before colliding with a tree behind him, shattering into pieces. "Perhaps the day after tomorrow." The frog servant continued in the same tone, as if nothing had transpired. "How am I to gain entry?" Alice reiterated loudly. "Do you wish to enter?" The frog servant replied, "You know, that is the fundamental question." Undoubtedly, Alice found it quite displeasing when others spoke in such a tone. "How dreadful," she muttered to herself. "All the creatures here merely engage in banter. It is enough to drive one mad." The frog servant appeared to perceive this as an opportune moment to reiterate his statement in a different manner. "I intend to remain seated here, intermittently, for several days on end." "What am I to do then?" Alice asked. "Do as you wish," the frog servant replied, before commencing to whistle. "Alas, I can no longer indulge in idle chatter with him," Alice exclaimed in despair, utterly a fool. She then opened the door and stepped inside. The door led directly into a vast kitchen, where thick smoke filled the air. The Duchess sat upon a three-legged stool, nursing an infant, while a cook leaned against the hearth, stirring a large pot that seemed to be brimming with soup. Surely, an excess of pepper had been added to that soup, Alice remarked, for she was incessantly sneezing. The air was saturated with the pungent scent of pepper, causing even the Duchess to occasionally let out a sneeze. As for the infant, it was either sneezing or wailing. The only beings in the kitchen not sneezing were the cook and a large cat perched on the mantel, grinning broadly. "Pray tell," Alice inquired timidly, uncertain if it was polite to speak first, "why does your cat smile in such a manner?" "It is a Cheshire cat," the Duchess replied, "and that is the reason." "Foolish pig," she suddenly shouted, her voice rising dramatically, startling Alice. Yet, she soon realized the remark was directed at the infant, not at her. Gathering her courage, she continued, "I did not know that Cheshire cats always grin. In fact, I was unaware that cats could smile at all." "They certainly can," the Duchess asserted, "most of them do." "I was not aware of such a thing," Alice said politely, secretly delighted that the Duchess was conversing with her. "You are indeed a most uninformed individual," the Duchess remarked, "and that is a fact." Alice found the tone of the statement utterly disagreeable and deemed it prudent to divert the conversation. As she contemplated a suitable topic, the cook removed a large pot of soup from the stove and immediately began hurling everything within reach at the Duchess and the infant. First came the iron, followed by a frying pan, plates, and dishes. The Duchess, seemingly oblivious to the chaos, remained unperturbed even as these objects struck her, while the baby commenced wailing, leaving one to ponder whether or not it had been struck. "Oh, do be cautious with your actions," Alice exclaimed, her heart racing with trepidation, fearing that the child's precious nose might be severed. A hefty frying pan soared through the air, nearly knocking the infant's nose askew. If everyone tended to their own affairs, the Duchess rasped, this world would operate far more efficiently than it currently does. "That is hardly a favorable notion," Alice retorted, relishing the opportunity to display her knowledge. "Have you considered the effects of day and night? The Earth completes a rotation on its axis in 24 hours. Regarding axes, the Duchess interjected, "Quickly use an axe to behead her." Alice cast a furtive glance at the cook, anxious to ascertain whether she intended to heed this command. Yet the cook remained engrossed in stirring the soup, seemingly oblivious to the exchange. "Thus," Alice continued, "I believe it is 24 hours, or perhaps 12. "Oh, do not disturb me," the Duchess exclaimed. "Mathematics is what I find most intolerable." Having spoken, she resumed nursing the infant, serenading it with a lullaby, shaking vigorously at the end of each line. "If you sneeze, you shall be punished. He merely seeks to vex me, knowing it is quite amusing." The chorus, with the cook and the baby joining in "Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. I am quite stern with the child. If he sneezes, I shall strike him. He may revel in the joy that pepper brings." Chorus. Oh dear. Oh dear. Oh dear. Come here, if you so desire. You may tend to this child for a moment, the Duchess exclaimed to Alice, tossing the child into her arms. I must prepare to engage in a game of croquet with the Queen. The Duchess hurriedly exited the room. As she departed, the cook hurled a frying pan at her. Narrowly missing her mark, Alice struggled greatly to grasp the baby, for it was an oddly shaped creature, its arms and legs flailing in all directions, Alice mused. It resembles an octopus. The poor little thing, when she finally caught hold of it, emitted a series of hissing sounds akin to a steam engine, writhing and stretching for a minute or two before Alice managed to hold it securely. Upon discovering a suitable method of care, twisting the infant into a knot and firmly grasping its right ear and left foot to prevent any unraveling, she carried the child outside. If I do not take this child away, Alice contemplated, they are certain to slay it within a day or two. Leaving it behind would be tantamount to complicity in murder. She emphatically uttered her final words, while the small creature in her arms emitted soft grunts, having ceased its sneezing. No more grunting, Alice admonished. That is hardly an appropriate means of expression. No tears. If you are to transform into a pig, my dear, Alice stated gravely, then I shall have no further connection to you. Be cautious. The poor little creature whimpered again, or perhaps it was more of a grunt, the sound ambiguous. They lapsed into silence for a moment. Alice began to ponder. What should she do with this creature once she brought it home? It grunted once more, the sound so loud that Alice was startled into glancing down at its face. This time, it was unmistakably a pig, and Alice felt that continuing to carry it was utterly absurd. Thus, she gently set the small creature down, watching with a sense of relief as it scampered quietly into the woods. If it grows up, she mused, it might become an exceedingly ugly child, but I believe it will turn into a rather lovely pig. She started to recall the other children she knew, contemplating which of them might fare better as a pig. Alice thought to herself, if only someone were aware of the proper method to transform them into pigs. At that moment, she was startled to see the Cheshire Cat perched on a branch of a tree several yards away, grinning as it caught sight of Alice. It appeared to be in good spirits, she mused, though its long claws and numerous teeth still instilled a degree of trepidation in her. The Cheshire Cat, she said timidly, for she was entirely uncertain whether it favored that name. However, it simply smiled even more exaggeratedly. Come now, thus far it has been quite pleased. Alice then inquired, pray tell me, which path should I take? That largely depends on where you wish to go, the Cheshire Cat replied. I do not know where to go. Then it matters not which road you take, as long as I arrive somewhere. Oh, you will, the Cheshire Cat assured her, as long as you walk far enough. Alice believed this to be true, so she ventured to ask another question. What sort of people reside here? In that direction. The Cheshire Cat gestured with its right paw, lives the Mad Hatter, and in that direction, it waved its other paw, resides the March Hare. You may visit either of them, they are both mad. But I do not wish to associate with mad individuals, Alice protested. Oh, you have no choice. The Cheshire Cat replied. We are all mad here. I am mad, and you are mad as well. How do you know I am mad? Alice questioned. You must be. Otherwise you would not have come here. Alice refrained from responding, but continued. Then how do you know you are mad? First, the Cheshire Cat stated, dogs are not mad. Do you agree? I suppose so, Alice replied. Very well, then, the Cheshire Cat continued. You see, dogs growl when they are angry and wag their tails when they are happy. In moments of joy, I roar, and when angered, I wag my tail. Thus, I have succumbed to madness. I refer to it as barking, not roaring, Alice remarked. Call it what you will, replied the Cheshire Cat. Are you to play croquet with the Queen today? I delight in the game, Alice responded, though I have yet to receive an invitation. You shall find me there, the Cheshire Cat said, before vanishing into thin air. Alice, unperturbed, had grown accustomed to the peculiarities of her surroundings. When she glanced back to the spot where the Cheshire Cat had just been, it reappeared unexpectedly. Farewell. By the way, how is that child? The Cheshire Cat inquired, almost forgetting to ask. It has transformed into a pig, Alice stated calmly, as if the Cheshire Cat's presence was entirely ordinary. I suppose so, the Cheshire Cat replied before disappearing once more. Alice lingered for a moment, half-heartedly hoping to see the Cheshire Cat again, but it did not re-emerge. After a minute or two, she proceeded toward the direction of the March Hare's abode. I have encountered the Hatter before, Alice remarked. The March Hare is bound to be the most amusing. Perhaps so, but it is now May, so it shall not be as mad as March. With that thought, she lifted her gaze and spotted the Cheshire Cat perched upon a branch. Are you referring to a pig or a fig? The Cheshire Cat queried. Well, I have often seen a cat smile, Alice mused. The smile remained, yet the Cheshire cat had vanished. This was the most extraordinary occurrence she had ever witnessed. Not long after, she beheld the house of the March Hare. Alice deduced that this must be the March Hare's residence, for the chimney bore a resemblance to rabbit ears, and the roof was cloaked in fur. The house appeared excessively spacious, and she wished to refrain from further ambulation. Thus, she took another bite of the mushroom she held in her left hand, until she attained a height of approximately 2 feet. At that moment, she timidly approached, murmuring to herself, "I suppose it is likely to be at its most mad. I might as well visit the Mad Hatter." Chapter 7. A mad afternoon tea. Beneath a tree in front of the house stood a table, at which the March Hare and the Mad Hatter were engaged in tea drinking, with a dormouse nestled between them in slumber. They carelessly utilized it as a cushion, resting their elbows upon it, conversing above its head. The dormouse must have been quite uncomfortable, Alice thought, yet it appeared to be asleep. I dare say it wouldn't mind. The table was quite large, yet they all squeezed into one corner. Upon noticing Alice's approach, they exclaimed in unison, "No room. No room." However, there was evidently ample space. Alice, incensed, plopped herself into a large armchair at one end of the table. "Why not have some red wine?" the March Hare suggested encouragingly. Alice surveyed the table, observing that there was nothing aside from tea. "I see no red wine," she replied. "There is no red wine," the March Hare stated. Alice retorted indignantly, "Well, that is rather impolite of you to say." The March Hare countered, "It is rather impolite of you to sit down uninvited. I was unaware that this was your table." Alice responded, "Clearly, this table could accommodate many more than just 3. Your hair needs a trim," the Mad Hatter remarked, gazing curiously at Alice for a moment. This was his first utterance. "You ought to learn not to judge others," Alice retorted somewhat sternly. "It is exceedingly rude." Upon hearing this, the Mad Hatter's eyes widened. Yet he inquired, "Why is a raven like a writing desk? Come, let us seek some amusement." Alice thought, feeling delighted that they had begun to pose riddles. "I believe I can deduce the answer," she declared aloud. "Are you suggesting that you think you can guess the answer?" the March Hare questioned. "Then you ought to articulate your thoughts," he continued. "Not at all the same," the Mad Hatter interjected. "You could also assert that I see what I eat and I eat what I see convey identical meanings. You might as well say," the March Hare added, "that I enjoy what I receive and I receive what I enjoy are the same. You could even say," the Dormouse chimed in, seemingly half asleep, "that I breathe while I sleep and I sleep while I breathe are alike. It is all the same to you," the Mad Hatter concluded, and thus the conversation came to an abrupt end. They sat in silence for a while Alice pondered that all she could recall was the riddle concerning the raven and the writing desk, nothing else. The Mad Hatter was the first to shatter the stillness. "What is today's date?" He turned to Alice and asked, pulling a pocket watch from his coat, anxiously glancing at it and occasionally shaking it, holding it to his ear. Alice pondered for a moment and then replied, "For a clock." "Wrong by 2 days," sighed the Mad Hatter. "I warned you that butter wouldn't suffice." He glared angrily at the March Hare. "Yes, but there must have been crumbs mixed in as well," the Mad Hatter lamented. "You shouldn't have used a bread knife. It brings the crumbs in." Alice curiously peered over his shoulder. What a fascinating watch. It can tell you the month and the date, yet it cannot tell the time. Why bother with time? The Mad Hatter muttered. "Can your watch tell the year?" "Mine can," he asserted. Alice found herself utterly perplexed. The Hatter's words seemed devoid of practical meaning, yet were undeniably authentic English. "I do not quite comprehend your meaning," she replied as politely as possible. The Dormouse had fallen asleep once more. "He is asleep," the Mad Hatter remarked, pouring a bit of hot tea onto the Dormouse's nose. The Dormouse impatiently shook his head, eyes still closed, and said, "Of course, I was just about to say so myself." "Did you guess the answer?" The Mad Hatter turned again to Alice. "I do not know," he admitted. "I do not know either," the March Hare chimed in. Alice sighed wearily. "I believe you could engage in more meaningful activities instead of squandering time on questions that yield no answers." "If you understood time as I do," the Mad Hatter replied, "you would not speak of wasting time. It is to blame." "I do not grasp your meaning," Alice stated. "Of course you do not." The Mad Hatter disdainfully shook his head and remarked, "I dare say you have never conversed with time." "Ah, that is the crux of the matter," he continued, "for it cannot endure being struck. Now, if you maintain a cordial relationship with it, it will almost acquiesce to your every whim. For instance, suppose it is 9 o'clock in the morning, precisely the moment classes commence. You need only gently hint to time, and the hour hand will swiftly comply. At 1:30 in the afternoon, it is time for a meal. If only that were true, the March Hare murmured to himself. Of course, it would be splendid. Alice pondered aloud. But I suppose that would mean I would not feel hunger. Perhaps not at first, the Mad Hatter replied. But you could remain at 1:30 for as long as you desire. Is that how you manage time? Alice inquired. Twinkle, twinkle, little bat. Where exactly do you stand? You must be familiar with that tune, the Mad Hatter asked. I have heard a similar song, Alice responded. The Mad Hatter continued to sing. You here in your world, soaring through the sky, just like a teacup in flight. Twinkle, twinkle. At that moment, the dormouse swayed and began to sing the refrain, Twinkle, twinkle, for such an extended duration that they had to pinch its mouth to bring it to a halt. How barbaric! Alice exclaimed. Since that day, the Mad Hatter lamented. The requests I made have never been honored again. Time forever lingers at 6 o'clock. Alice suddenly realized that this was the reason for the multitude of teapots and cups scattered about, was it not? Indeed, the Mad Hatter sighed. For time had eternally lingered at the hour of afternoon tea, leaving us no opportunity to cleanse our utensils. I suppose you perpetually repeat this cycle? Alice inquired. Indeed. The Mad Hatter affirmed, until all provisions are exhausted. But what transpires when you resume? Alice boldly questioned. Might we change the subject? The March Hare yawned, interrupting the Mad Hatter. I have had quite enough of this. I suggest we allow this young lady to regale us with a tale. I fear I do not know a single story, Alice replied, her heart racing at the suggestion. Then the Dormouse shall speak. They exclaimed together, Wake up, Dormouse. They gently propped him up on either side. The Dormouse slowly opened his eyes. I have not been asleep, he said in a hoarse, feeble voice. I heard every word you uttered. Pray, tell us a story. The March Hare implored. Yes, do share one. Alice beseeched. Hurry, the Mad Hatter added, lest you fall asleep without having accomplished anything. Once upon a time, there were 3 sisters, the Dormouse hastily began. Their names were Elsie, Lacey, and Tilly, residing at the bottom of a well. What did they subsist on? Alice inquired, her curiosity piqued by matters of sustenance. They lived on syrup. The Dormouse replied after a moment of contemplation. You know, they cannot do that, Alice gently remarked. They would fall ill. Indeed, the Dormouse agreed, very gravely so. Alice began to ponder what such an extraordinary lifestyle might entail, leaving her utterly bewildered. Thus she pressed on with her inquiry. But why do they reside at the bottom of the well? Let us have another cup of tea. The March Hare earnestly suggested to Alice. What you imply is that you cannot drink less, the Mad Hatter interjected. Drinking more is far easier than drinking nothing at all. No one is soliciting your opinion, Alice retorted. Who is making personal statements now? The Mad Hatter proudly inquired. The Dormouse took a moment to reflect, then remarked. It is a well of syrup. Where in the world is there such a thing? Alice began to feel quite irate. But the Mad Hatter and the March Hare chimed in unison. Hush. The Dormouse, exasperated, declared, if you cannot behave politely, it would be best for you to tell the story yourself. No, please continue. Alice humbly insisted. I shall not interrupt you again. I mean, there could indeed be such a well in the world. There is one, truly. The Dormouse exclaimed indignantly, yet agreed to proceed. So, these 3 young ladies were learning to paint, you know. What were they painting? Alice once again disregarded her pledge. Syrup, the Dormouse blurted out. I require a clean cup, the Mad Hatter interjected. Let us all move forward 1 seat. He spoke as he shifted to the next seat, and the Dormouse followed suit. The March Hare took the place recently vacated by the Dormouse, compelling Alice, somewhat reluctantly, to occupy the position of the March Hare. The Mad Hatter emerged as the sole beneficiary from this round of seat rearrangement, leaving Alice in an even more dismal predicament. For the March Hare had just overturned a milk jug into his plate. Wishing to avoid further offending the Dormouse, Alice spoke with great caution, but I do not understand. Where do they extract the syrup from? You can draw water from a well, replied the Mad Hatter. So I suppose you could also draw syrup from a well. Couldn't you, you fool? But they are in the well, Alice remarked to the Dormouse, failing to notice the latter part of the exchange. Of course, the Dormouse replied. In the well. They are learning to paint, it continued, yawning and rubbing its eyes, already on the brink of slumber. They paint all manner of things, all beginning with the letter M. Why? Alice inquired. Why not? Retorted the March Hare. Alice fell silent. By this time, the Dormouse had closed its eyes and was dozing, but was jolted awake by a pinch from the Mad Hatter, letting out a small yelp before continuing. Beginning with M, such as cats catch mice, full moon, ants, and so forth. Have you ever seen those not too far off things depicted in a painting? Honestly, now that you ask, Alice said, quite bewildered, I do not believe. Then you ought not to speak, the Mad Hatter interjected. In any case, I shall not return there. Alice traversed the woods, pondering how this was the most absurd afternoon tea she had ever attended. Just as she uttered those words, she noticed a door ajar on one of the trees. How peculiar. Alice mused, yet everything today seemed odd. Perhaps it would be best to enter immediately. She stepped inside without hesitation. Chapter 8. The Queen's croquet ground at the entrance of the garden stood a grand rose bush, adorned with white roses. Yet 3 gardeners were diligently painting them red. Alice found this to be utterly incomprehensible and walked past them slowly. As she approached, she overheard one of them exclaim, "Be careful, 5. Don't splash paint on me." "I can't help it," 5 retorted angrily. 7 lightly nudged my elbow. 7 looked up and said, "Indeed, 5 always shifts the blame onto others. You ought to remain silent. I heard the Queen say you ought to be beheaded," 5 declared. "Why?" the first speaker inquired. "That is none of your concern, too," 7 replied. "No, it is his concern," 5 insisted, adding, "and I shall inform him it is because you brought the chef tulip bulbs instead of onions." 7 set down his brush and began, "Well, all unfair matters," but as Alice observed them, his gaze inadvertently fell upon her, causing him to suddenly restrain himself. The others turned to look around and bowed their heads. "Could you possibly enlighten me," Alice inquired timidly, "as to why we are painting those roses?" The 5th and 7th gardeners remained silent, merely gazing at the second. The second gardener whispered, "My dear lady, you see, this should be a tree of red roses. Yet we have mistakenly planted a white rose tree. If the Queen discovers this, we shall surely lose our heads, as you well know. Thus, we have been laboring diligently before her arrival." Just then, the 5th gardener anxiously pointed towards the far side of the garden, exclaiming, "The Queen! The Queen!" The 3 gardeners immediately knelt upon the ground. The sound of many footsteps echoed, and Alice glanced around, eager to catch sight of the Queen. Leading the procession were the card soldiers, their forms identical to those of the 3 gardeners, all flat rectangles with limbs extending from each corner. Following them were 10 ministers, also shaped like squares, marching 2 by 2. After them came 10 royal children, joyfully skipping hand in hand, all adorned in hearts. Following was a group of dignitaries, most of whom were the King and Queen themselves. Alice recognized the White Rabbit, who appeared to be in a great hurry, speaking hurriedly while looking anxious, smiling at each person he passed without noticing Alice as she walked by. Lastly, there was the Knave of Hearts, clutching a deep red velvet cushion upon which rested the King's crown. Bringing up the rear of this grand parade were the King and Queen of Hearts. Alice was quite skeptical about whether she should lie on the ground like the 3 gardeners, yet she could not recall having heard such a rule during the parade. Moreover, if everyone were required to lie down, obscured from view, what purpose would the procession serve? Alice pondered. Thus she remained stationary, awaiting the unfolding events. As the procession approached her, they halted and turned their gazes upon her. The Queen sternly inquired, "Who is this?" addressing her remark to the Knave of Hearts, who merely bowed and smiled. "Fool!" The Queen impatiently shook her head, then turned her attention back to Alice and asked, "Child, what is your name?" "I am Alice." "Your Majesty," she replied politely, though she quietly mused that they were merely a deck of cards. "I need not fear them. Who are these?" The Queen gestured towards the 3 gardeners sprawled around the rosebush. "You see, they are all lying face down, their backs exposed, indistinguishable from one another. One could not tell if they were gardeners, soldiers, ministers, or the Queen's 3 children." "How should I know?" Alice replied, surprised by her own audacity. "It is of no concern to me." The Queen's face flushed with rage, glaring at her like a beast for a moment before shrieking, "Off with her head. Behead her at once." "That is utterly preposterous," Alice declared loudly and resolutely, yet the Queen remained silent. The King gently placed his hand on her arm and timidly remarked, "Consider, dear, she is but a child." The Queen, in a fit of fury, turned sharply to the Knave of Hearts, commanding, "Turn them over." The knave, with a gentle nudge of his foot, complied. "Up!" the Queen bellowed, and the 3 gardeners immediately sprang to their feet, bowing before the King, the Queen, the royal children, and the other esteemed guests. "Enough of this," the Queen exclaimed, "you make me dizzy." She then pivoted towards the rose bushes, inquiring, "What are you doing here?" "Your Majesty, we beg your pardon," the gardeners replied in a tone of utmost humility, kneeling before her. "We are attempting to." "I understand," the Queen interjected, as she scrutinized the roses, "cut off their heads." The procession continued onward, leaving 3 soldiers behind to execute the unfortunate gardeners, who hastily sought refuge beside Alice. You shall not be beheaded, Alice declared, sheltering them in a large flower pot nearby. The trio of soldiers wandered aimlessly for a minute or two, finding no one, and quietly trailed after the others in the procession. Have their heads been cut off? The queen shouted. Splendid. She continued. Can you play croquet? The soldiers remained silent, merely gazing at Alice, as it was clear the question was directed at her. I can. Alice responded enthusiastically. Then let us proceed. The queen roared, and Alice joined the throng, eager to discover what would unfold next. What a splendid day it is, a timid voice remarked beside her. Alice happened to pass by the white rabbit, who was gazing at her face with great curiosity. Very well, Alice inquired, but what of the Duchess? Why? Do you mean I feel regret? The rabbit asked. No, not at all, Alice replied. I do not feel regret in the slightest. I am asking why. She slapped the queen, the rabbit remarked. Alice erupted into laughter. Oh, be quiet, the rabbit whispered in terror. The queen will hear you. She is late, the queen proclaimed. Everyone take your places. The queen's deafening call reverberated, and chaos ensued as everyone began to scatter in all directions, colliding with one another. Yet, within a couple of minutes, they settled down, and the game commenced. Alice mused that she had never encountered such a peculiar croquet field in her life. It was a rugged expanse of uneven terrain, with live hedgehogs serving as balls, flamingos as mallets, and soldiers bent over, using their hands and feet as goals. Alice's first challenge was mastering the flamingo. She nestled the flamingo comfortably under her arm, allowing its legs to dangle, and just as she attempted to straighten its neck to strike the hedgehog with its head, the flamingo would twist and raise its head, sporting a look of utter confusion, which always made Alice chuckle. Moreover, when the flamingo lowered its head, preparing to begin anew, it would find the hedgehog had unfurled its body and attempted to scurry away, which was exceedingly vexing. Additionally, there was always a ditch or a bump obstructing her path as she endeavored to send the hedgehog toward the goal, and the soldiers, who served as the goals, would perpetually stand upright and wander off to other places. Alice soon came to the realization that the contest was utterly chaotic. The participants rushed onto the field without waiting for their turns, bickering incessantly, and even resorting to blows over a hedgehog. Before long, the Queen of Hearts, in a fit of rage, began to stomp about, vociferously demanding either the beheading of her opponent or her own, at a rate of approximately once per minute. Alice began to feel an unsettling anxiety. Although she had yet to engage in any quarrel with the Queen, she was acutely aware that the threat of decapitation loomed ominously. She pondered, what would become of me? This place had a peculiar affinity for executions, and strangely, some still managed to survive. She searched for a means of escape, hoping to slip away unnoticed. At that moment, she observed an odd phenomenon in the air, initially perplexing her, but after a minute or two, it provoked a smile. Alice mused aloud. It's the Cheshire Cat. Now there is someone with whom I can converse. Are you well? The Cheshire Cat inquired, its mouth just large enough to facilitate speech. Alice waited until the cat's eyes appeared, then nodded in acknowledgement. Engaging it in conversation was futile at this stage, she thought. She needed to wait until at least one ear manifested. After a short while, the entire head materialized, prompting Alice to set down the flamingo and recount the events of the contest, delighted to have an audience. The cat seemed to find the situation sufficiently clear and ceased its manifestation. I find them utterly unfair, Alice began in a tone of complaint. Their quarrels are so loud that one cannot even hear their own voice, and it appears there are no particular rules governing their behavior. At least, if there are, no one seems to care. You cannot fathom how perplexing these creatures are. For instance, there is a goal I must pass through, and then the next one is at the opposite end. I should have struck the Queen's hedgehog just now, but upon seeing my hedgehog approaching, it fled. What do you think of the Queen? The Cheshire Cat whispered. Not much, Alice replied. She is too. Just then, she noticed the Queen closely following her, listening intently. So Alice altered her words, continuing, she may very well win. There might be no need to wait for the game to conclude to determine the victor. The Queen appeared pleased, smiling as she walked past Alice. Who are you speaking to? The King inquired, stepping closer to Alice and curiously peering at the head of the Cheshire Cat. This is my friend, the Cheshire Cat, Alice said. Allow me to introduce you. I am not fond of its appearance, the King remarked. However, if it wishes, it may kiss my hand. I think it best not to, the Cheshire Cat replied. Do not be rude, the King admonished. Do not look at me like that. He spoke while hiding behind Alice. The cat may look at the King, Alice asserted. I read it in a book, though I cannot recall which one. Very well, Make it vanish at once, the king insisted firmly, just as the queen passed by. Dear, he called out to her, I wish for you to remove this cat. The queen possessed only one method to resolve all difficulties, regardless of the circumstances: severing heads. Without so much as a flutter of an eyelid, the queen commanded. I shall summon the executioner, the king said eagerly, hastening away. Alice's hedgehog was engaged in a skirmish with another hedgehog, and Alice perceived this as an opportune moment to strike the opponent's ball away. The sole predicament was that her flamingo had traversed to the far side of the garden. Alice watched helplessly as it attempted to fly towards a tree. The moment Alice appeared, the three individuals implored her to resolve the dilemma, each reiterating their perspectives, yet they all spoke simultaneously, creating a cacophony that made it exceedingly difficult for Alice to discern their words. The executioner insisted that without a complete body, one could not behead a head, asserting that he had never performed such an act before, nor would he ever in his lifetime. Conversely, the king argued that any creature with a head could be executed, and the executioner should not speak such nonsense. The Queen of Hearts declared that should no action be taken swiftly, she would order the beheading of everyone present. It was this final proclamation that rendered all in attendance grave and anxious. Alice found herself at a loss for words, merely suggesting, This matter is best directed to the Duchess. You ought to inquire of her. She is in prison. The Queen instructed the executioner, Bring her here. The executioner dashed away in haste. Chapter 9. The Tale of the Mock Turtle. You can hardly imagine how delighted I was to see you again, my old friend. The Duchess affectionately linked her arm with Alice's, and they strolled away together. Alice was quite pleased to find the Duchess so approachable, pondering whether it was the pepper that had rendered her so coarse and rude during their initial encounter in the kitchen. When I become a Duchess, Alice mused to herself, feeling rather melancholic, there shall be no pepper in my kitchen. One can certainly prepare delectable soups without it. Perhaps it is the presence of pepper that incites one's temper. She paused, marveling at her newfound hypothesis. Vinegar can sour one's disposition, chamomile engenders gloom, and malt syrup can make children sweet and delightful. I only wish people were aware of this. Then they would not be so miserly with such ingredients, you know. Perhaps it is of no consequence, Alice boldly declared. Tut, tut, my dear, the Duchess replied. Everything holds significance, provided one is able to discern it. With that, she inched closer to Alice. Alice felt somewhat uncomfortable with the Duchess's proximity. Firstly, the Duchess had a rather unappealing visage. Secondly, her chin was precisely at the height of Alice's shoulder, possessing an unsettling pointedness. Nevertheless, Alice was not one to behave rudely, so she endeavored to endure the situation. The competition was proceeding quite smoothly now, Alice remarked, as she merely intended to continue the conversation. Indeed, the Duchess remarked, its significance lies in love. The love that makes the world go round. However, someone whispered Alice, it is the fact that everyone manages their own affairs that truly keeps the world in motion. Oh, very well, the Duchess continued, leaning her sharp chin onto Alice's shoulder, implying that the essence is the same. Pay heed to reason and meddle less in others' matters. How she revels in discovering meaning in everything, Alice pondered. I dare say you are wondering why I do not embrace your waist. The Duchess paused momentarily and replied, the reason being, I am quite perplexed by the temperament of your flamingo. Allow me to give it a try, if you please. Truly, the Duchess asserted. Both flamingos and mustard can be rather biting. This is a case of like attracting like. Yet mustard is not avian, Alice interjected. Quite right, you remain ever so consistent. The Duchess replied, always so keen to delineate. I believe it is a mineral, Alice suggested. Indeed, the Duchess affirmed, seemingly eager to concur with all that Alice stated. There exists a substantial mustard mine nearby, and the lesson it imparts is the more I possess, the less you shall have. Oh, I see, Alice exclaimed, having overlooked the latter remark. It is a plant, though it may not appear so, it indeed is. I wholeheartedly concur with your perspective, remarked the Duchess, conveying the essence of her statement. To become the person you aspire to be, or more simply, to never envision oneself as incapable of becoming the self that others perceive, nor to imagine becoming a version of oneself as interpreted by others. Alice politely interjected, if I were to transcribe your words, I believe I might grasp their meaning. Yet I find your speech rather perplexing. There is no need to trouble yourself by repeating it, Alice continued. Oh, do not mention trouble, the Duchess exclaimed. I bestow upon you all that I have articulated. That is indeed a rather inexpensive gift. Alice mused, relieved that such offerings were not presented to her on her birthday. However, She refrained from voicing her thoughts aloud. "What are you pondering now?" the Duchess inquired, again resting her pointed chin upon her shoulder. "I possess the right to contemplate," Alice retorted sharply, as she began to feel a sense of irritation. "Much like those rights you claim," the Duchess continued, "just as pigs must fly, and yet." At this juncture, her voice gradually faded. Alice was taken aback as she sensed the Duchess's hand, which was entwined with her arm, starting to tremble at the mention of the Duchess's favored term, meaning. Upon glancing upward, Alice was startled to find the Queen of Hearts standing before her, arms crossed and brow furrowed, resembling two bolts of lightning. "What splendid weather we are having today, Your Majesty," the Duchess whispered. "Now, I shall offer you a most forthright warning," declared the Queen, stamping her foot. "Either you or your head must vanish at once. The choice is yours." The Duchess, without a moment's hesitation, made her selection and vanished in a flash. Throughout the course of the game, the Queen of Hearts incessantly quarreled with the other players, vociferously demanding, "Off with his head," or "Bring me his head." Those condemned by her decree were promptly escorted away by soldiers. Naturally, at this juncture, the soldiers could no longer assume the role of goalposts. Thus, within half an hour, the field was devoid of any goalposts. Except for the King, the Queen, and Alice. All other players were imprisoned, awaiting their grim fate. Fuming, the Queen turned to Alice and inquired, "Have you ever encountered a mock turtle?" "No," replied Alice. "I am not even familiar with the concept of a mock turtle." "It is the ingredient for concocting mock turtle soup," said the Queen. "I have neither seen nor heard of it," Alice responded. "Very well," said the Queen, "let it regale you with its tale." As they departed, Alice overheard the King quietly addressing his companions. "You are all pardoned. See, this is indeed a fortunate turn of events." Alice mused, for she was greatly unsettled by the Queen's frequent orders for executions. Before long, they encountered a griffin, lounging in the sunshine and snoring peacefully. The griffin stirred, rubbing its sleepy eyes, and watched the Queen until she disappeared from view, at which point it erupted into a fit of laughter. "How amusing!" The griffin, half speaking to itself and half addressing Alice, inquired, "What is there to find amusing?" Alice, puzzled, responded, "What is there to find amusing? Of course, it is about her." The griffin explained, "This is entirely her whimsical fancy. Look around, no one has been executed. Come now, come now." Alice mused, trailing behind it, reflecting that she had never been commanded in such a manner throughout her life. Never. Before long, they spotted the mock turtle in the distance, sitting sorrowfully and alone upon a rock. As they approached, Alice heard it sigh deeply, as if its heart were breaking. She felt a profound sympathy for it. "Why is it in such despair?" she inquired of the griffin. Thus, they approached the mock turtle, whose large eyes brimmed with tears as it merely gazed at them in silence. "This young lady wishes to hear your tale," the griffin stated. "Allow me to recount it." The mock turtle replied somberly, "But you both must sit and refrain from speaking until I have finished." They complied, and for the initial few moments, silence enveloped them. Alice thought to herself, if it does not begin, she wondered how it could ever conclude. Nevertheless, she waited patiently. At last, the mock turtle commenced with a deep sigh. "Once upon a time, I was a real turtle. In our youth," the mock turtle continued, growing calmer, "we attended school in the sea, where our teacher was an old turtle, whom we referred to as the master turtle. But it is not a land turtle. Why do you call it that?" Alice interjected. "We refer to it as the land turtle, for it imparts wisdom upon us." The mock turtle retorted with indignation, "You truly possess a wooden head. How foolish. You ought to feel utterly ashamed for posing such a rudimentary question." The griffin added. They all sat in silence, gazing at the unfortunate Alice, who longed to find a crevice to hide within. Ultimately, the griffin urged the mock turtle, "Do continue your tale, old fellow. Do not dwell on this matter incessantly." Thus, the mock turtle resumed, "Indeed, we attended school in the sea, though you may find it hard to believe." "I never claimed disbelief," Alice interjected once more. "You did," the mock turtle asserted. "Silence," the griffin interjected. Before Alice could voice her thoughts, the mock turtle continued, "We received the finest education, in fact. We attended school daily." "I also attend school every day," Alice replied, "and there is nothing to be proud of." "Do you have elective courses?" the mock turtle inquired with a hint of urgency. "Certainly," Alice responded, "we study French and music." "What about laundry class?" the mock turtle asked. "Of course, we do not have that," Alice retorted in annoyance. "Ah, then your school is not a good one," the mock turtle sighed in relief, for in our case, the tuition bill concludes with electives in French, music, and laundry class. Surely, You would not wish to select laundry class, Alice remarked, considering your residence lies beneath the sea. I cannot afford it either, the mock turtle lamented. I only attended the standard curriculum. What is the curriculum? Alice inquired. I have never heard of ugliness law, she boldly remarked. What is that? The griffin raised its forepaws in astonishment. What? You have never heard of ugliness law? It exclaimed. Surely, you must have heard of beautification? Yes, Alice replied. Somewhat skeptical, which means to enhance the appearance of anything. Well then, the griffin continued, if you do not know what ugliness law is, are you not a fool? Alice decided not to pursue the matter further, turning instead to the mock turtle. What else have you learned? What is class like? She asked. Well, I cannot demonstrate it for you personally, the mock turtle replied, for my body is too rigid, and the griffin has never learned it either. I have yet to. The griffin interjected, but I visited the classical literature master. He is an old crab. I have never seen him, the mock turtle sighed, but it is said that he teaches laughter and sadness. Indeed, the griffin said, then sighed. Both creatures buried their faces in their paws. How many hours of class do you have each day? Alice asked, eager to change the subject. 10 hours on the first day, the mock turtle replied. 9 on the second day, and so forth. What a peculiar curriculum, Alice exclaimed. So that is the course, the griffin said, as it diminishes each day. This presented a novel perspective for Alice, prompting her to ponder carefully before articulating her next inquiry. So, there is a holiday on the 11th day? Indeed, replied the mock turtle. And what transpired on the 12th day? Alice eagerly pressed on. Let us conclude the tale of the curriculum here, interjected the griffin decisively, and regale her with some tales of games. Chapter 10. The lobster quadrille. The mock turtle let out a profound sigh, wiping its eyes with the back of its forepaws. It gazed at Alice, attempting to speak, yet became choked with emotion for a minute or two, as if a bone were lodged in its throat. The griffin began to shake the mock turtle, patting its back. Eventually, the mock turtle regained its composure, tears streaming down its cheeks, and continued, You may not have had extensive experiences living beneath the sea. I have never lived underwater, Alice replied. Perhaps you have never even encountered a lobster. Alice almost confessed that she had eaten one once, but after a moment's reflection, she said, No, I have never. Thus, you are unaware of the sheer delight of the lobster quadrille. Indeed, I truly do not comprehend it, Alice admitted. What sort of dance is it? What sort? The griffin responded, but to first stand in 2 lines by the seaside. The mock turtle exclaimed, Seals, turtles, salmon, and now we must clear away all the jellyfish. That will certainly take some time. The griffin interrupted the mock turtle's discourse. Step forward 2 paces. Each of you shall have a lobster as a companion, declared the griffin. Of course, responded the mock turtle. Step forward 2 paces and find a partner. Exchange lobsters, and then retreat in the same order. The griffin continued, and then, the mock turtle added, you must throw away the lobster. The griffin shouted, soaring into the air. Toss it into the sea, as far as you can. Swim after them. The griffin shrieked. Do a somersault in the water, commanded the mock turtle, capering about in a frenzy. Now, switch to another lobster dance partner. The griffin bellowed. This dance shall be truly delightful, Alice timidly remarked. Would you like to witness it? Inquired the mock turtle. Come, let us try the first dance step. The mock turtle said to the griffin, we can dance even without lobsters. Who shall provide the vocals? Oh, you shall, replied the griffin, for I have forgotten the lyrics. Thus, they commenced a solemn dance around Alice, occasionally stepping on her feet as they drew too close, while waving their forepaws in rhythm. The mock turtle sang a melancholic tune, his voice soft and mournful. A codfish said to a snail, Can you move any faster? Behind us, there is a porpoise, playfully treading upon my tail. Observe the lobsters and sea turtles as they dash forth. They await your presence amidst the cobblestones for the grand ball. Will you join us? Or would you rather not? The invitation lingers in the air, a whimsical dance of willingness and reluctance. You truly cannot fathom the exhilaration of being swept into the sea alongside the lobsters. Reluctance persists, a refrain echoing, as the question of attending the ball arises once more. Do not let your countenance betray you, dear snail. Come forth and partake in the festivities. As we ponder the realms beyond, another shore beckons. The farther one ventures from England, the closer one draws to France. Oh, regarding the cod, the mock turtle remarked, you have certainly encountered it, have you not? Indeed. Alice replied, I often see it at meals, but she hastily trailed off. I am unaware of what meals entails, the mock turtle interjected, yet if you frequently observe them, you must surely know their appearance. Your perspective on breadcrumbs is misguided, the mock turtle continued. They are destined to be washed away in the sea. However, they clutched their tails in their mouths, the reason being. At that moment, the mock turtle yawned, closing its eyes, and urged you to elucidate the matter to her. Thank you, Alice responded. This is quite fascinating. I have never understood cod in such depth before. If you are interested, I can elaborate further, said the griffin. Do you know why they are called toothy cod? I have never contemplated that, Alice replied, her brow furrowed in confusion. Why? Boots and shoes, she echoed, her tone laced with bewilderment. How do you clean your shoes? What makes them so shiny? Inquired the griffin. The boots and shoes from the sea, the griffin murmured, are polished with toothy cod. Now you understand. What are they made of? Alice asked with curiosity. If I were a toothy cod, Alice mused, her thoughts still lingering on the song, I would say to the dolphin, please step back, kindly keep your distance. The mock turtle interjected. They must keep the dolphin close, for without it, the clever fish cannot venture anywhere. Is that truly so? Alice exclaimed in astonishment. Indeed, affirmed the mock turtle. If a fish were to inform me of its travels, I would inquire which dolphin it was bringing along. Shouldn't you say destination? Alice suggested. I could regale you with the adventures I embarked upon since this morning, Alice admitted, a hint of timidity in her voice. However, recounting yesterday's experiences seems futile, for I was an entirely different person then. Clarify yourself, prompted the mock turtle. No. First, recount your adventure, the griffin urged impatiently. Explaining the preceding causes would require an inordinate amount of time. Thus, Alice began recounting her adventures from the moment she encountered the white rabbit, sharing her experiences with the curious creatures beside her. Initially, she felt a twinge of anxiety as the two beings leaned in closely, their eyes and mouths agape with rapt attention. Nonetheless, she summoned her courage. Her audience remained silent until she recited the altered lines of You Are Old. Father William to the caterpillar, prompting the mock turtle to take a deep breath and exclaim, How peculiar. Everything is distinctly different, remarked the griffin. The mock turtle pondered thoughtfully and expressed a desire to hear her repeat certain phrases, urging her to begin anew. It cast a glance at the griffin, as if holding some authority over Alice. Stand up and recite the voice of the sluggard, commanded the griffin. That resembles the voice of a lobster, it continued. Recounting the peculiar phrase, You've roasted me too darkly. I must sweeten my hair. The creature resembled a duck with eyelets, using its nose to trim belts and buttons, revealing its toes. This differs from what I once memorized in my youth, the griffin noted. Well, I have never heard that before, the mock turtle admitted. But it does sound rather unusual. Alice remained silent, cradling her face in her hands, pondering whether anything more natural might occur. I wish someone would clarify. The mock turtle insisted. But what are the toes? It pressed on. You see, how can a lobster reveal them with its nose? This is the first position of dancing. Alice expressed her profound confusion regarding the matter at hand and yearned to shift the conversation, despite her apprehensions that everything might go awry. She trembled and continued. I passed by its garden and caught a glimpse of how the owl and the panther were sharing a pie. The mock turtle interrupted her. What use is it to recite these words if you do not clarify? This is, to date, the most perplexing thing I have encountered. Indeed, I think it would be best if you moved along, advised the griffin. This notion brought a sense of relief to Alice. Shall we attempt the lobster quadrille once more? The griffin proposed, or shall we have the mock turtle provide the accompaniment? The mock turtle sighed deeply and began to sing, his voice occasionally choked with emotion. Delicious soup, served in a steaming bowl, of vibrant green broth. Who wouldn't wish to taste such a delightful concoction? Soup for dinner, delectable soup. Soup for dinner, delightful soup. Delicious soup, soup. Delicious soup, soup. Dinner, dinners, soup, delightful, delicious soup. With it, who would ever desire fish or crave game and other dishes? Who wouldn't wish to savor the splendid soup at 2 pence a bowl? The splendid soup at 2 pence a bowl. Delicious soup, soup. Delicious soup, soup. Dinner, dinner. Dinner's soup, soup. Delightful, delicious soup. Sing it once more, cried the griffin, just as the mock turtle began to repeat the song. A distant sound of a judgment commenced to echo forth. Come along, the sphinx with the head of an eagle exclaimed, and without waiting for the song to conclude, hurriedly took Alice's hand and rushed away. The mournful sounds of the night echoed, and the delectable aroma of soup wafted through the air. Chapter 11. Who Stole the Pie? By the time they arrived, the king and queen of hearts had already taken their seats upon the throne, surrounded by a multitude of birds and beasts. along with an entire deck of playing cards. The jack, shackled, stood before them, flanked by soldiers on either side. Not far from the king stood the white rabbit, one hand clutching a trumpet while the other held a scroll of parchment. In the center of the court was a table, upon which rested a large plate of pies. An enticing sight that made Alice's mouth water. Gazing at the pies, she felt a sudden pang of hunger. I hope the trial concludes swiftly, she thought, so that the pies can be distributed among everyone. This desire seemed nearly unattainable, so she began to observe her surroundings to pass the time. Alice had never been to court before, but she had read about it in books, and thus found herself familiar with nearly all the names of the items present. That must be the judge, Alice murmured to herself, noting his conspicuous silver hair. It should be mentioned that the judge was, in fact, the king. His crown perched atop his wig, looking quite uncomfortable in such attire. Over there must be the jury, Alice contemplated. Observing the 12 creatures, she had to refer to them as creatures, for among them were both birds and beasts. I suppose they are the members of the jury. She repeated the last sentence to herself a few times, filled with pride, for she was quite certain that few girls her age possessed such an understanding of the courtroom. Even the jurors were not much better off. The 12 jurors were preoccupied, scribbling furiously on their slates. What were they doing? Alice whispered to the Sphinx, for they had not ceased their writing since the trial commenced. Utterly foolish, Alice exclaimed indignantly, but she quickly halted, for at that moment, she heard the white rabbit cry out, "Silence in the court." The king donned his spectacles, anxiously surveying the room, eager to discern who had spoken. Alice observed all this with clarity. Peering over the jurors' shoulders, she noticed that they were all writing utterly foolish on their slates, and she even saw one who, uncertain of how to spell foolish, had to ask his neighbor for assistance. The list would be quite chaotic before the trial concluded, Alice mused. One juror's pencil squeaked incessantly, and unable to contain herself, Alice circled the courtroom, darting behind that juror, swiftly seizing the opportunity to take the pencil. Alice acted too quickly. The poor little juror, wasn't that Bill the Lizard? Was utterly bewildered, searching for his missing pencil. Thus, for the remainder of the day, he was left to use his finger as a writing implement, but this proved futile, as it left no mark upon the slate. "Bailiff, read the charges," the king commanded. At that moment, the white rabbit sounded his trumpet thrice, unfurling a parchment scroll to commence his proclamation. The Queen of Hearts baked several pies on a summer's day, and Jack of Hearts pilfered those pies, absconding with them entirely. "You may deliberate on your verdict," the king addressed the jury. "Not yet, not at this stage." The white rabbit hastily interrupted the king, emphasizing that numerous steps remained. "Summon the first witness," the king commanded. The white rabbit again sounded his trumpet thrice, exclaiming, "Summon the first witness." The initial witness was the Mad Hatter, who entered with a teacup in one hand and a slice of buttered bread in the other. "I beg your pardon, your majesty," he began. "I brought these items with me as I had not finished my tea when I was summoned." "You ought to have finished it," the king retorted. "When did you commence your tea?" The Mad Hatter glanced at the March Hare, who, alongside the Dormouse, entered the courtroom hand in hand. "I believe it was the 14th of March, he replied. "The 15th, the March Hare interjected. "The 16th, added the Dormouse. "Write it down," commanded the king to the jury, who eagerly inscribed the 3 dates on their slates, subsequently tallying them and converting the sum into shillings and pence. "Remove your hat," the king instructed the Mad Hatter. "It is not mine," the Mad Hatter protested. "You stole it," the king bellowed, turning to the jury, who immediately recorded this fact once more. "I keep them to sell," the Mad Hatter added. "I don't have a single one, for I am a hat maker." The queen donned her spectacles and fixed her gaze upon the Mad Hatter. His complexion was pallid, and he fidgeted restlessly. "Testify," commanded the king. "Do not be nervous, or I shall have you executed on the spot." This admonition seemed to have no motivating effect on the witness. The Mad Hatter continued to shift his feet, anxiously glancing at the Queen of Hearts. In his fluster, he mistook his teacup for a buttered roll and took a hefty bite. At that moment, Alice experienced an exceedingly peculiar sensation, which perplexed her until she realized that she was beginning to grow once more. Initially, she contemplated rising to leave the court, but after careful consideration, she resolved to remain as long as there was space to accommodate her. "I wish you would stop crowding me," said the Dormouse seated beside her. "I can scarcely breathe." "I cannot help it," Alice replied meekly. "I am growing." "You have no right to grow here," the Dormouse retorted. "Nonsense," Alice replied with newfound boldness. "You know you are growing as well." "Indeed, but my growth is reasonable," the Dormouse countered, "not in such an absurd manner." He stood up in a huff and crossed the courtroom to the other side. The queen remained fixated on the Mad Hatter, and as the dormouse traversed the court, she instructed an official, "Bring me the list of singers from the last concert." Poor Mad Hatter trembled in the courtroom, having lost both of his shoes. "Show me your evidence at once," the king demanded, his voice laced with fury, "or I shall have you executed, regardless of your trepidation. I am but a pitiable soul." "Your Majesty," the Mad Hatter stammered, his voice trembling, "and I haven't even begun to partake in tea, not for over a week now. Bread and butter have become increasingly scarce. And tea, oh, the tea glimmers." "What is it that glimmers?" the king inquired sharply. "Of course, it is the tea, starting with the letter," the king retorted, his tone accusatory. "Do you take me for a fool? Proceed." "I am a wretched being," the Mad Hatter continued. "Ever since then, most things have shimmered, save for the March Hare, who exclaimed." "I did not say that," the March Hare interjected hastily. "You did," the Mad Hatter countered. "I refute that," the March Hare insisted. "It is denied," the king declared. "Strike that from the record." "Very well, nonetheless," the Dormouse chimed in. The Mad Hatter anxiously surveyed the room, hoping to see if the Dormouse would also disavow, but the Dormouse remained oblivious, lost in slumber. After that, the Mad Hatter resumed. "I sliced more bread and butter." "But what did the Dormouse say?" one juror inquired. "I cannot recall," the Mad Hatter replied. "You must remember," the king commanded, "or I shall execute you." The unfortunate Mad Hatter relinquished his teacup and buttered bread, kneeling before the king, lamenting, "I am but a miserable creature, your Majesty." "Your speech is utterly lacking," the king remarked. At that moment, a guinea pig suddenly erupted in cheers, only to be swiftly silenced by the court officials. Due to the difficulty in encapsulating this series of actions with a singular, precise term, allow me to elucidate. They procured a large burlap sack, placed the guinea pig headfirst within, and subsequently seated themselves atop it. Alice found amusement in witnessing this spectacle, reflecting on how she often read in newspapers about individuals attempting applause at the conclusion of a trial, only to be promptly silenced by court officials. It was only now that she comprehended the significance of those reports. "Once you have concluded, you may take your leave," the king proclaimed. "I cannot retreat any further," replied the Mad Hatter, "for I am already upon the ground." At that moment, another guinea pig erupted in cheers, only to be swiftly silenced as well. "Well, that guinea pig is doomed," Alice mused, believing the trial could now proceed smoothly. "I would much prefer to finish my tea," the Mad Hatter remarked, anxiously glancing at the queen, who was perusing the list of singers. "You may depart," the king announced, prompting the Mad Hatter to hastily exit the courtroom. Neglecting to don his shoes, "Go outside and behead him," the queen instructed one of the officials, yet by the time the official reached the doorway, the Mad Hatter had vanished. "Call the next witness," the king commanded. The subsequent witness was the Duchess's cook, and before she even appeared in court, Alice surmised she must be clutching a pepper box, as the individuals at the entrance were incessantly sneezing. "Please present your testimony," the king insisted. "I cannot," the cook replied. The king, growing increasingly anxious, turned to the White Rabbit, who whispered, "Your Majesty must interrogate this witness." "Very well, if it is necessary. Then I must proceed with the interrogation." The king, clad in a melancholic expression, crossed his arms and furrowed his brow as he gazed at the cook. His eyes nearly slitted. In a somber tone, he inquired, "What is the pie made of?" "Mostly pepper," replied the cook. "Syrup," a drowsy voice chimed in from behind her. "Put shackles on that dormouse." The queen shrieked, "Sever its head. Expel the dormouse from the court. Bind it. Strangle it. Shave off its whiskers." For several moments, the entire court descended into chaos as the dormouse was expelled. When calm was restored, the cook had vanished. "No matter. Call the next witness," the king reassured the queen. "Indeed, my dear, you must interrogate the next witness. My head is about to burst." Alice observed the White Rabbit fumbling through the list. Her curiosity piqued regarding the next witness, as there had been little valuable testimony thus far. "Imagine how astonished I would be," she mused, "when that large white rabbit calls out my name, Alice, in his high-pitched voice." Chapter 12. Alice's testimony stop. Alice exclaimed loudly, overwhelmed by the moment, completely forgetting how much she had grown in the past few minutes. In her haste to rise, the hem of her dress overturned the jury box, sending all the jurors toppling onto the heads of the crowd below, sprawling haphazardly on the ground, which reminded Alice of a fishbowl she had accidentally knocked over just the week prior. Alice glanced at the jury box and noticed that in her haste, she had inadvertently placed Bill the Lizard head down on her seat. The poor creature was disconsolately wagging its tail, unable to move. Quickly, Alice retrieved him and adjusted his position. Muttering to herself, "This is inconsequential. I believe that during the trial, regardless of which way Bill the Lizard is facing, his contribution shall remain the same." The jury, recovering from their state of agitated shock, found their slates and pencils, resuming their meticulous recording of every detail, except for Bill, who seemed to be gasping for air, merely sitting there with his mouth agape, staring blankly at the ceiling of the courtroom. "How much do you know about this matter?" the king inquired of Alice. "I am entirely ignorant," Alice replied. "Absolutely nothing?" the king pressed. "Not a thing," Alice affirmed. "That is significant," the king remarked as he turned to the jury. Just as they were about to make a note, the white rabbit interrupted him. "Not significant, Your Majesty," he said in a tone of utmost respect while simultaneously exchanging knowing glances with the king. "Of course, not significant. I mean," the king hastily interjected, then murmured to himself. "Significant, not significant, not significant, significant," as if he were testing which words sounded most pleasant. Some jurors wrote down significant, while others inscribed not significant. Alice observed this clearly, given her proximity to the jury. Yet, she thought to herself, it mattered not how it was written. At that moment, the king, busily scribbling in his notebook, called out in a muffled voice, "Silence." Then, reciting from his code, he declared, Article 42, "All individuals exceeding a mile in height shall vacate the court." Everyone turned their gaze towards Alice. "I am not a mile high," Alice protested. "Indeed, you are," the king asserted. "In fact, you are nearly 2 miles tall." The queen added. "Well, regardless, I shall not depart," Alice replied. "Besides, this is not a customary law. It is clearly one you have just enacted." "This is the oldest statute in the code," the king retorted. "Then it ought to be the first article," Alice countered. The king's countenance paled as he hastily closed the code and tremulously whispered to the jury, "Deliberate upon your verdict." "There is further testimony, Your Majesty," the white rabbit exclaimed. Springing up, "This paper was just found." "What does it say?" the queen inquired. "I have yet to open it," the white rabbit responded. "But it appears to be a letter from the prisoner to someone." "It must be so," the king concluded, "unless it is an anonymous letter, which is quite rare." "To whom is it addressed?" one juror asked. "Is it in the prisoner's handwriting?" another juror queried. "No, it is not," the white rabbit replied. "Which is the most peculiar matter?" The jury was thoroughly perplexed. "He must be imitating another's handwriting," the king speculated. The jury regained their composure. "Your Majesty," the knave of hearts declared, "I did not pen that letter, nor can they prove it was written by me. There is no signature at the end." "If you do not sign it," the king remarked, "it only serves to heighten your culpability. Surely, you are jesting, otherwise you would inscribe your name as an honest person would." Most of the audience began to applaud, for this was the first statement made by the king that seemed to bear any semblance of reason. "It serves as evidence of his guilt," declared the queen. "That proves nothing," Alice retorted, "for you do not even comprehend the meaning of the poem." "Read it aloud," commanded the king. The white rabbit donned his spectacles and asked, "Your Majesty, where shall I begin?" "From the very beginning," the king replied with gravity, "and do not cease until you reach the conclusion." The white rabbit commenced his reading. "They informed me that you had visited her and mentioned me to him. She granted me a commendable character, yet claimed I could not swim. He conveyed to them that I had not departed, a truth we all acknowledge if she were to escalate matters. What would become of you? I offered her 1. They conferred upon him 2, and you bestowed upon us 3 or more, albeit they were originally mine. Should I or she find ourselves entangled in this affair, he believes you would release them, just as we would. My contention is that you, before her momentary lapse, have consistently been an obstacle between him and us. Do not let him discover her fondness for them, for this must remain a secret between you and me, unbeknownst to others. This constitutes the most significant testimony we have heard," the king remarked while rubbing his hands. "Now, let the jury. If anyone can elucidate this," Alice interjected, "I shall reward them with 6 pence. I find no meaning in any of it." As Alice swiftly grew larger in the past few minutes, she felt no fear and decisively interrupted the king. The jury inscribed upon the slate, but she doubted there was any significance to it, yet they made no effort to annotate their records. If there is no meaning, then this spares the world a bother. You see, as we need not seek out any trouble. The king placed the poem upon his knee, glancing at it with one eye, though I am uncertain. I seem to perceive some semblance of meaning within it. After all, it stated, "Say I cannot swim." "You cannot swim, can you?" the king inquired, turning to the knave of hearts. The knave, sorrowfully shaking his head, replied, "Do I look like I can?" Certainly not, for he was fashioned from cardboard. Well, thus far. The king mused, "We know this to be true," undoubtedly referring to the jury. "I gave her one, they gave him two, which must certainly pertain to the pie. You know, how could it not?" The king triumphantly pointed at the pie upon the table, declaring nothing could be clearer. Then he added, before her moment of hysteria, "Dear, I do not believe you have ever had a fit, have you?" The queen retorted fiercely, "Never," as she hurled an ink bottle at the lizard. The unfortunate Bill was rendered incapable of inscribing upon the slate with his finger, for he discovered no marks were left upon it. Yet now he hurriedly dipped into the ink to continue writing, as the ink dripped down his face. Thus, "Those words do not suit you." The king surveyed the court with a smile, yet a profound silence enveloped the room. It was a pun. The king, irate, added a remark that elicited laughter from all. "Let the jury deliberate on their verdict," he proclaimed, perhaps for the 20th time that day. No, the queen interjected. "First the verdict, then the judgment." "Nonsense," Alice exclaimed loudly, astonished that such an idea of prior pronouncement could exist. "Silence," the queen retorted, her face turning a shade of purple. "I shall not," Alice declared defiantly. "Off with her head," the queen shouted, yet no one moved. "No one heeds your command. I have grown far too large. You are merely a deck of cards." At that moment, the entire deck flew into the air, rushing towards her. Alice let out a shriek, half from fright, half from indignation. She attempted to push the crowd away, only to find herself lying on the bank, her head resting on her sister's lap, as her sister gently brushed away the fallen leaves that had drifted onto her face. "Wake up, Alice dear," her sister urged. "You have slumbered for quite some time." "Oh, I had the most peculiar dream," Alice replied, recounting the bizarre tales that she could recall from her recent slumber. Once Alice finished her tale, her sister kissed her and said, "My dear, that was indeed a strange dream, but you must hurry and join us for afternoon tea. It is quite late." Thus, Alice sprang to her feet and dashed away, her thoughts swirling with the wonder of such a marvelous dream. After Alice departed, her sister remained motionless, resting her head upon her hand, gazing at the sunset while reminiscing about little Alice and her enchanting escapades, until she too began to drift into a slumber, a dreamscape of her own. Initially, she envisioned young Alice, her small hands clasped upon her knees, her bright and eager eyes fixed upon her. She could hear the cadence of Alice's voice, and witnessed the gentle sway of her head as she brushed aside the errant strands of hair that obscured her vision. She continued to listen and observe, as everything around her sprang to life, reminiscent of the creatures in Alice's dream. The long grass rustled at her feet, where the white rabbit hurried past, while a startled mouse splashed through the adjacent pond. She could still hear the crisp clinking of teacups as the March Hare shared eternal afternoon tea with friends. The terrified screams of unfortunate guests during the Queen's decree, the snorts of the piglet upon the Duchess's lap, the clattering of plates and dishes as they danced through the air, the roar of the griffin, the scratching sound of the lizard inscribing on the stone, the muffled sobs of the oppressed guinea pig, and in the air lingered the distant, pitiful murmur of a faux tortoise. Thus, she closed her eyes and sat upon the ground, as if she were ensconced within a fairy tale. Despite her awareness that she would inevitably have to reopen her eyes, she savored the fleeting moment, knowing all too well that it would dissolve into the starkness of reality. The grasses would merely rustle in the wind. The pond would ripple in response to the swaying reeds. The clinking teacups would transform into the jingling of sheep bells. The Queen's shriek would, in truth, be the voice of a shepherd, and the sneezes of infants, the roars of the Sphinx, along with all manner of peculiar sounds, would coalesce into the cacophony of a bustling farmyard. Meanwhile, the distant murmurs of cattle would supplant the heavy, choking sobs of false sea turtles. The end.